She says, well, maybe this is why God had her stay around this long to influence these ladies.
No doubt about it.
She is amazed at how little they respond and how little they know.
But we don't know what their background.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
I got it. We are live.
all right, we're on. So, her name is Lois. So if you would all join me in singing happy birthday, right?
Lois.
That's what I just said. Yeah. Anybody else want anything to add? Okay, the normal happy birthday song, although I guess we're supposed to pay royalties when we sing that, but don't tell anybody. All right, ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lois. Happy birthday to you. All right, thank you. I know she'll appreciate that. Okay, we're in Luke chapter 15. This is exciting passage because it's one with which we're very familiar, and yet I think there are things that we can learn from it, and maybe some things to unlearn from it too. Sometimes that happens. So we're in this section where Jesus is giving parables in response to what occurred in the first two verses of chapter 15. You look there. It says there, now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near him to listen to him. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. And as we looked last week, many view these, what we call three parables, really as one parable and three movements. And I think the words that it says here concerning Jesus, that he told them this parable, singular, kind of bears that out. So these are three movements of one parable. And remember, whenever we're looking at parables, we need to look for what is the main point. Sometimes we get caught up in all kinds of minutiae, and we miss the main point by looking down other rabbit trails and stuff. I hope keep me from doing that myself, because it's easy to do. But all three of these movements of this one parable are themed in the grace of God. The contrast between the first two being that in the first parable, with the man going after the lost sheep, it arises from the compassion that God has um, because of the misery that the people are in. And in the second, with the lost coin, it arises from the value which he attaches to their persons. Now, why is he telling these parables? Because these two themes, the grace of God and the compassion of God, run contrary to the kind of spiritual apartheid practiced by the Pharisees, who believed in salvation through segregation. Segregation from certain material items, certain foods, certain practices, and above all, certain people. You got to keep separate from them. And so that brings us to, here's the context I forgot to go back into. We're in a section that begins with chapter 13:22, runs up through 17. At the beginning of this section, we saw that Jesus points out that most of Israel is excluded from the kingdom. Secondly, many outcasts and Gentiles will be in the kingdom. Thirdly, there's a warning against hasty professions. Look before you leap. Don't just say you're embracing Jesus without thinking about the cost. And then fourthly, the value of the hopeless and sinners, which is the section we're in now. And within that context, having been outraged at Jesus saying that most of Israel is excluded and many outcast Gentiles will be in the kingdom, these Pharisees who are among those that will be excluded are all now taking umbrage with the fact that Jesus hangs around sinners, because if he's hanging around sinners, he must be one of them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be with them. All right, so we've looked at the parable or the movement of this parable concerning the man who left 99 sheep to go out and bring back the one lost one. We won't go over that whole thing, but if you're unfamiliar with that, read verses 4 through 7. And then we go to verse 8, and we find ourselves looking at another movement of the parable, which we call the lost coin. First of all, we see in verse 8 that there is something lost. The first part of verse 8, it reads, "Or what woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it?" All right, so if she has 10 silver coins, you might wonder why she has 10 silver coins. Is she got online and she's buying up silver against inflation? No. This may have been, in fact, part of her headdress, which you see here in this picture. 10 for Hebrew people is the number of completeness, and so the implication may be is that this is all she had. This is either, it could have been her dowry, it could have been her lifelong savings, her hedge against retirement, any of those things, but it represented all that she had, these 10 silver coins. So she lost 1 out of 10, which has the appearance of being more serious than 1 out of 100, right? So Jesus is kind of upping the ante here, looking at this lost coin. If it's lost, then of course we find in the last part of verse 8, that she then seeks for it, and so it is sought. The house that she's living in, like most poor houses, it was probably without windows. That's why she has to light a lamp. And probably also had a dirt floor, which makes it hard to find coins. Dirt floor would have provided numerous hiding places under the dirt or in the chinks in the corners. Have you ever lost something and turned on any available lighting so as to better see what it was you were looking for? Anybody ever had that happen? Yeah. I think the thing I usually use a light for, used years ago, was if I dropped the contact, because you'd hope the light would reflect off of it, or maybe it was you dropped a ring or something like that. When I was in junior high school, not that long ago, among the many different kinds of jokes that were popular, one of them was called moron jokes. Any of you remember moron jokes? Maybe they didn't tell. Maybe you people were more sensitive than we were. There was one that went like this. On a dark street, a moron was intently scouring the concrete around him beneath a beaming streetlight. Another man came upon him and inquired of him for what he was looking. The moron replied that he had lost his wallet and was attempting to find it. The other man asked him if he knew where it was that he had lost the wallet. The moron pointed down the street. "Then why are you looking for your wallet here?" asked the man. The moron pointed to the streetlight overhead and answered, "The light's better here." Don't make me explain that. So she lights a lamp, not because just to make the light better, but to try to find this lost coin. And it says she searched carefully. Not surprising, carefully is a medical term, as we see Luke using often, it's used only here. As I've said before, I point out these things to you, the medical terms that Luke uses, and the number of times he uses expressions that are only found in his writings, just so when you hear the nonsense that scholars come up with saying that all the gospel writers copied off of one document called Q, or they all copied off of Mark, or the earliest one, or whatever, how utter nonsense that is. And so that's why I point out these things. All right, in verse 9, first part of verse 9. Well, any comments about this so far? I want to give you a chance if you want to comment on the lost coin and the searching for it. Again, because it's valuable. All right, in verse 9, it is found. When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors. The verb used for she calls together is in the middle voice for those of you that are in the language. which means calling to herself. So she's calling them to herself, and there's a prefix on the front of it, which means together. So she's calling to herself and calling them together. There's one article for the two clauses, friends and neighbors. So it's her friends and neighbors, which brings them together into one. And the article is feminine, which indicates that these are female friends. So she's calling together her female friends and neighbors to rejoice with her. Then we find the response. She says in the second part of verse 9, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin which I had lost." Interesting, there's a similar parable told in the Jewish commentary on Song of Songs, we call Song of Solomon, called Midrash Shir HaShirim. And this would have been written, or at least written down, maybe in existence before the time of Jesus, but written down after the time of Jesus. And the rabbi there instructs, "If thou seek wisdom as silver, that is, if thou seek the things of the law as hidden treasures, a parable. It is like a man who, if he lose a shekel or ornament in his house, he lighteth some candles, some torches, till he find it. If it be thus for the things of this world, how much more may it be for the things of the world to come?" So once again, Jesus is telling a parable that would have been somewhat familiar to one with which they all were, or somewhat similar to one with which they're already familiar. So there may have been a parable going around similar to this, and Jesus tweaks it and tells it in order to communicate something. Notice between the first two movements of this parable, we have the coin in this one, as opposed to my sheep in verse 6. I had lost in this one, as opposed to in verse 6, which was lost. I had lost. Unlike the sheep, the coin did not lose itself. The woman says, "I lost it." So she takes ownership over that. And then we come to the application that Jesus gives us in verse 10. "In the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Literally, joy arises. So you've maybe experienced that. Something happens, joy arises. And if the joy is arising in the presence of the angels of God, what does that indicate about God?
Cares for us and watches over us.
And what about the joy?
I'm happy to have one of us back.
Yeah. If the angels are rejoicing, then God is rejoicing, right? The angels kind of represent here the neighbors that are called together. So God is in the place of the woman who's lost the coin. The angels are the neighbors that are rejoicing in the presence of God over one sinner who repents. So the point of this parable can be found in this lesson. God does not want sinners to isolate themselves. Believers. God does not want believers to isolate themselves from the world to such a degree that they never relate to the lost. That was his message concerning what the Pharisees were doing. They were isolating themselves. And this is Jesus' implicit rebuke of the Pharisees and modern day legalists. So we're not to isolate ourselves from sinners, and instead to have the idea that we are prayerfully looking for their redemption, for them being found, and be wanting to rejoice in that and not turn away from it. All right, any comments or questions about the lost coin? All right, now we get to the part where I had slides and don't. And we won't get through the entire rest of this today, but we'll get a start on it. This next part of the parable is extremely well known throughout Christendom as the story of the prodigal son. I would like to ask a show of hands for anyone who has not heard of the prodigal son, but it would be embarrassing to you. So won't do that. But I'm assuming everybody here has heard of it. And so designating it as the prodigal son, the focus can be readily observed to be the lost son, just as there was a lost sheep and a lost coin. That would be the normal way we would enter this. But to view it in this way is to miss the point that our Lord is making in this third part of the parable. There's a father who has an important role in the story. For that reason, some have decided to call it the parable of the gracious father, which is a little more on point than just the wastefulness of a son. And there's another son whose presence does not come in until the end, but whose appearance illuminates the true lesson of the tale. If anything, this story is more about the second son than it is the first. And yet, as this story is told in Sunday school classes, in churches, whatever, there are times when the last son is left out entirely, and it becomes all about the prodigal son. So for that reason, I beg to depart from the usual title, and I've changed this several times, and unfortunately you can't see it, but I've decided to call this the Tale of Two Lost Sons. Verses 11 to 32. I went around as to what to call this first son, and I finally decided I was spending too much time trying to come up with the perfect word. So I decided to call him and not use prodigal because that's what everybody thinks of, and few people know what prodigal means. So I'm calling him the libertine son. Another word that you may not know either, but anyway, libertine means loose, living, that you live at liberty to do whatever you wish. So verse 11, and he said, Jesus said, a man had two sons. There we have it right there. There are two sons, not just one. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me a share of the estate that falls to me. Now, what does this mean, a share of the estate? Well, apparently this man, from the other things we see later, was wealthy, and so he had an estate that upon his death would be divided among his sons. Since there are two sons, the law, you can look at this in Deuteronomy 21:17, provided that a third of the estate would go to the youngest son, and then the older son would get 2/3 of the estate. Well, a son had no right to claim his inheritance during the lifetime of his father. To ask for his share of the estate was to imply that the father was already dead. In this request can be heard the real feelings of this younger one. I wish you were dead. How many teenagers have said that to their parents at one time or another? He was purely selfish. He wasn't thinking of his father at all, or his brother, or what would happen as a result of him claiming this inheritance ahead of time. This following was on a bulletin board at a newspaper in Sarasota on selfishness. If it's in my hand, it's mine. If I can take it from you, it's mine. If I can take it from you, it's mine. Oh, they've repeated that. Must be a song. If I had it a little while ago, it's mine. If it's mine, it must never appear to be yours in any way. If I'm doing or building something, all of the pieces are mine. If it looks just like mine, it is mine. If I saw it first, it's mine. If you are playing with something and you put it down, it automatically becomes mine. If it's broken, it's yours. Sounds like my grandchildren. But this is the attitude of this younger son. And the father, rather than standing firm, instead of giving him the discipline that the son deserved, it says, so he divided his wealth between them. The word wealth here is an interesting word. I'm not sure how we would translated into English, but it really, it's the root is bios, which is the word from which we have biology. It means life. So he divided his life in a sense, the means to live, the means by which he would conduct his living. The Jewish law, as I said, allotted 1/2 as much to the younger son as to the elder. At the death of the father did not have to abdicate in favor of the sons, but this very human parable here depicts the impatience of home restraints and the optimistic ambition of youth, says one commentator. The Jewish sages strongly advised against dividing up the inheritance prior to one's death. Sirach 33, 19-23 begins with this declaration: to son or wife, to brother or friend, give no power over yourself while you live, and give not your goods to another so as to have to ask for them again. Because in dividing up the wealth, this father was abdicating not only what he possessed, but his control over it. So from that point on, if he needed anything, he had to go to his older son. Which seems kind of odd when you look at what happens later, but he divided the wealth, therefore he had no more wealth.
We're laughing because we've already done that.
Yeah.
Now we have nothing, and if we need a loan, we have to go to them and say, will you sign for us?
How's that? Not to be personal, but how's that working out?
Terrific.
Okay, that's good. Not so much with this guy.
No, like this.
Dr. Darrell Bock explains, to distribute the estate too soon was to risk having to fall into another's care. And so the division of the wealth went between them and went to both of the sons. Any other comments to this point? See, it's a little more involved than a teenager in the family coming and saying, you know, Dad, can I have a couple bucks? Or, you know, can you write me a check? Or because not only is the son taking a part of the estate, that he's taking away his father's means of living. Verse 13, and not many days later, the younger son, man, having a hard time talking this morning. The younger son gathered everything together. So he must have still been a teenager because he's not married, and they would have married by that time, but certainly by the time he was in his 20s normally. And he went on a journey into a distant country. What does that tell you, that he went into a distant country?
Not seeing eyes that people knew him, knew his father, his wife.
Yeah,
So he could live however he
get as
wanted.
far away from family as he could. Yeah, Jim?
His background too, because
Yeah.
he was leaving these Israel people.
Yeah, because apparently he's going into a Gentile area. Yeah. Any of you ever, when you were young, want to run away from home? I ran away from home once. I packed up my little suitcase or something and went next door to my great aunt's.
This is how you get home.
I don't remember. I don't think I was there very long. So what are we told he does there? He squandered his estate. My translation says. Any other words that your translations use instead of squandered?
Wasted his possession.
He did what?
Wasted.
Wasted. Yeah. Okay, the root word used here is the word scorpion. I'm not sure how that fits into it, but more exactly, he scattered his property. It's also a word used for winnowing grain. He squandered his estate with loose living. So it's the opposite of gathering everything together. At the beginning of the verse, he gathered everything together, and then when he got where he was going, he spread it all apart, spread it all over the place. The word loose living is an adverb that's used only here in the New Testament. from a common adjective with this a privative. That means an a in front of a word, which negates the word. And the word is sozo, which is what we translate as saved. So it's the opposite of saved. He didn't save anything. He got rid of it all. So he went the limit of sinful excesses. Verse 14. Now, when he had spent everything, and in Greek, like most languages other than English, you can say something without using a pronoun because it's built into the verb. So when you have the pronoun actually stated, it's for emphasis. And the pronoun is stated here. It provides emphasis. He. Now, when he had spent everything, just by coincidence, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. Certainly, the famine made conditions even worse for this young profligate. He not only possessed no money, but the opportunities for income or even food became severely restricted. So what do you do? Well, verse 15, he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. Now, hired himself there is an interesting word. It literally means glued together. He attached himself to one of the citizens of that country. This word is very expressive here, implying that he forced himself upon the citizen. Maybe one of the guys he'd hung around with before when he was spending all his money. But the idea seems to be that this person was unwilling to engage him, and he took him into service only because the guy kept sticking to him, kept after him. And so he finally says, all right, go out in the fields and feed my swine. Now, why is the mention of swine so important in this story?
Definitely doing. And doing swine.
Yeah, not only not eat it, but not be associated with pigs, and it was prohibited even to own any. So the fact that he is out in a field with the pigs indicates that he has reached rock bottom. So what has happened here? 19th century Bible scholar Richard Trench observes, by his joining himself to the citizen, our Lord gives us a hint of that dark mystery in the downward progress of souls, by which he who begins by using the world as his servant to minister to his pleasures ends by becoming its slave. The next section, verses 16 to 19, takes us to where he becomes repentant. And because that's going to be more involved maybe than what we can accomplish in a couple of minutes, we'll stop here and pick that up in 2 weeks, the repentant son, in verses 16 to 19, as we continue on with this story of two sons. Any comments or questions as we conclude today? Yes.
I'll begin to the son, and the more I understand the older son's
Uh-huh.
bitterness and, disgust for him, so,
Yeah.
different take.
Yeah. And in a sense, at this point, the Pharisees would be, yeah, okay, this guy's showing his true colors. That's why we don't hang around with them. But there's a surprise ending. Good. Any other comments?
Good joke.
I get one once in a while. All right. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
So have you read the Drive Revive by Tim?
No.
It's an excellent book.
Yeah, I think maybe I heard him talk about it because the title sounds familiar. He used prodigal in a different way because it can have another meaning, and referring to the father as being
Yeah.
the focus of the story. And I think that's more appropriate than simply